Hi, I'm your host, Kevin Eikenberry, and usually these episodes are about me sharing a short piece of information with you or bringing on a guest. But for the next 6 weeks, as a part of this very special series called The Evolving Workplace, I'll be handing the mic over to Wayne Turmel. Wayne's been my co-author of The Long Distance Leader twice, The Long Distance Teammate, and The Long Distance Team. And he's been the host of an ongoing podcast called Long Distance Work Life Podcast, which has just come to a close. Although all those episodes are worth your time, go to longdistanceworklife.com to learn more. In this series, Wayne will give new context and new ideas for us as leaders to understand the evolving workplace and how we can lead our organizations and teams through it. Hope you will enjoy all of these episodes in the series. I hope you'll continue to enjoy everything else we bring you on the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. And now, here's Wayne.
Hi, everybody. I'm Wayne Turmel. You may know me from the Long Distance Work Life Podcast or just from my work here at the Kevin Eikenberry Group. I am Kevin's co-author on the Long Distance Work Life series of books, Long Distance Leader, Long Distance Teammate, and Long Distance Team. And the thing that really matters is that I have been studying remote and virtual communication for the last 20 some odd years. And so this is the first of a 6-part series on the evolution of work, how work has changed over the last, we're going to say approximately 35 years. Where we are now, how the heck we got here, where we think things are going. And it's important because we are in the middle of one of the most seismic changes in what it means to work and to have a job and to work for somebody else. Probably we've seen in the last 90 years since the 1920s and 30s. And so we hope that this is a very non-academic look. It's very casual, but we hope that it gives you some insight and some perspective on what the heck's going on out there. I believe personally you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. So we're going to start with kind of the beginnings of remote work and hit the major milestones and what that has meant in the change. If you hear your parents or your grandparents complaining and not understanding why work is what it is, there's a good reason for that. So we're going to go back to about 1990. Now, yes, we've had remote work before that. You've heard me say many times that, the first marathon was run because we didn't have email. Somebody was sending a message from the Battle of Thermopylae to Athens, and, that was the only way to do it. We've had remote work. Genghis Khan ruled half the world and never held a WebEx meeting. But think about 1990, if you were even alive then, and if you weren't, don't tell me. This is kind of the beginning of my adult career. And so if you think back to 1990, what was there? We had landlines. Instantaneous communication was basically telephone or fax machines. Very few people had them at home. The internet was still in the hands of geeks and scientists. People didn't have internet in their homes. If people had computers, they were huge, clunky things with monochrome screens. And even the heads of IBM were saying, nobody's going to need a computer at home. What little remote work existed was largely salespeople. We had a salesperson in a territory, maybe, because most sales calls were done in person. So it was, not optimal. But we were starting to investigate the idea, particularly in sales again, of could somebody work unsupervised away from everybody else and still be productive. The big watershed year, and this is kind of a sneaky big deal, was 1993. A couple of things happened. in 1993. First of all, big corporations, IBM in particular, was experimenting with the idea of allowing people to work from home at least part of the time so that they could do deep thought analysis work away from the hubbub of the office. That was the plan. Now, this was helped by the fact that in 1992, IBM released the ThinkPad, which was the first portable computer. One hesitates to call it a laptop because if you had one of these bad boys, you know that it was big and heavy and clunky. And since you probably didn't have internet access in 1992, it was essentially a big word processor. Most of the early adopters were either salespeople who were constantly traveling for work or senior managers who were traveling the country region to region. Email was starting to be a thing, but was still being used sparingly. And there were two critical things that created a huge watershed. The first was Microsoft 6.0 was released. And that made things like word processing, color, the introduction of PowerPoint, all the tools that we use in our everyday work only came out in its very roughest form in 1993. And that allowed normal people access to word processing without having to know codes and control alt something or other in order to indent a paragraph. The other thing was that America Online in 1993 started sending out free discs to people. And if you have never experienced the joy of using your telephone line, you couldn't be on the phone at the same time you used the internet, but all of a sudden everybody's grandma could access the internet. Not that there was a lot to access. And email between human beings on a personal basis started. And the consumer adoption of Microsoft and AOL and Apple doing its thing about this time really changed the way people thought about work. And it made it possible to work almost anywhere, at least in theory. Now, there's something, if you read the article on our blog at kevineikenberry.com, there's something that wasn't discussed in the article that I think is worth talking about. And that's this. Prior to the introduction of laptops and easy word processing software and the like, the way we worked was very different. Offices were important because managers, executives, and salespeople did not do their own admin work. There was usually one secretary or admin for every $1 million of revenue, which meant that most offices had people whose job it was to write correspondence and take care of the nuts and bolts, while people were allowed to do the job for which they were hired. And if you don't remember the chaos of salespeople who had always had secretaries and then suddenly allowed to write their own email unedited and send things out and build their own presentations, when before that had been in the hands of professionals, it was pretty chaotic. And not only was the quality of the work somewhat suspect, but all of a sudden managers, executives, less executives because a lot of them still have admins, but salespeople suddenly had to do their own admin work that had been done by somebody else. And while the computers and such allowed productivity overall to go up, we were spending a lot less time doing the jobs for which we were hired. And this is also a huge change in the way corporations were structured. And let me tell you this. It might not seem a big deal. Oh, we don't have secretaries. We don't have admins. In 1990, 6.1% of the workforce were secretaries and admins. By 2020, that number was less than 2%. There's an entire job category that disappeared. So yes, technology allowed us to change how quickly we could work and how productive we could be, but we also found ourselves doing a lot of jobs that for years had been done by somebody else. And so that changes the way we work. On the one hand, we were doing a lot of grunt work and admin that we could have probably lived without. On the other hand, we could work faster and we could work from anywhere because we didn't have that extra layer of workers. A couple other things happened. By 1999, 5% of the workforce was working from home at least part of the time. Internet speeds were picking up, and in 1999, WebEx became available. And this was a huge deal. I remember watching Oprah Winfrey in 1999 explained to every housewife in America that you could have a video call for free with anybody on the planet anywhere at any time. I mean, this was the stuff of science fiction. This was the Jetsons. And suddenly it was available to everybody. And this, as you can imagine, really started to blow things up. So the ability to work from anywhere, have good internet access, the introduction of webcams really only dates back to 1999 and really 2000. 2000 was the first laptops that had cameras built into them. So the age of asking, do I have to be on camera, had begun. But that was only 24 years ago. And while there's no hard evidence, my gut tells me, and anecdotally, this is when people realized they could get a lot more done outside of the office. So things like, I have a sick kid, can I work from home today? Bad weather, I don't feel great, I'm going to work from home because I have the sniffles. All of that became more common, and that was kind of the introduction of stealth remote work, if you will. Interesting thing, by 2008, for the first time, laptops outsold desktop computers. Think about the implications of that. Portability of our equipment became the standard in a lot of organizations. And that's the kind of watershed moment where you get these quantum leaps in what happens. By 2013, nearly 20%, remember, just a few years before, it was less than 5%. All of a sudden, by 2013, 20% of white-collar knowledge workers, whatever we call them, worked from home at least once in a while. And those numbers kept rising, and we saw the first backlash. In about 2013, 2014, Yahoo said, oh, wait a minute, people are working from home and our managers don't know how to handle this, so we're going to call everybody back into the office. And there was craziness and rebellion and people freaked out. And if this sounds familiar, it's very reminiscent of what is going on now with RTO requirements. So we're talking about 2013 here, right? Over the next 7 years or so, companies allow remote work. The number grows and grows and grows. The number of people who work remotely full or most of the time grows at about 20% per year. It's pretty amazing, actually. And here's the deal. Only 10% of companies have formal policies around remote work. Everything is done on a case-by-case basis. Some managers are comfortable with it, some aren't. Some companies allow it. Some companies, the senior execs don't even know that it's happening. I remember talking to clients who would walk through their offices and half the desks were empty. And they'd say, well, where is everybody? They're supposed to be at work. And the manager would say, well, they are at work, but so-and-so's in Denver, and so-and-so has a sick kid, and so-and-so has a big presentation tomorrow and wants to focus. And so it was happening. Remote work was happening, but there wasn't a lot of rhyme or reason to it. Okay, so now we're up to 2018. And not coincidentally, Kevin Eikenberry and I wrote The Long Distance Leader. We had been starting to do training in the area of remote teams and leadership for a while, but there was a demand, and our publisher saw the demand. A Long Distance Leader eventually has sold over 30,000 copies. We're in 7 or 8 languages. The timing was right. I do not kid myself that this is largely a timing issue. But 2018, we see the bubble rising. We see an increase in companies saying we need to get our hands around this. We need to create policies. We need to create systems, things like performance management. How do we manage these people? How do we prepare our leaders to lead people that they can't see? And as this bubble is building and building and building, 2020 arrived. And that's when COVID hits the scene. And you all know what happens next. The weekend of March 17th, 2020 becomes one of those monumental moments. And suddenly, and I know there is the sense that everybody started working from home. That is not true. It was about 35% of the workforce started working from home, but it was the 35% of the workforce that generally gets the attention. Managers, white-collar workers, admins, and jobs that people didn't think could be done remotely were people who it was thought were indispensable in the office could get their job done. Couple of interesting things happened. And some of it was because there had been all this stealth remote work going on that productivity did not drop the way it was expected that they would. The dirty little secret of 2020 was that senior leaders were prepared for the bottom to fall out of their business, and that people would be disengaged and not work if they weren't supervised. And it turns out that a lot of those big concerns were largely unfounded. Productivity did not drop nearly as much as they should, and in some cases actually improved. Employee engagement scores went up for the first 6 months of the pandemic. And the reason, if you stop and think about it, is because there was a crisis. People pulled together. Yes, I want to keep my job, so I'm going to focus and work extra hard. But I also don't want my employer to go out of business, and I don't want my coworkers to fail. And there's a crisis in the world in general. And it turns out when people care and try really hard, they're engaged. So remote work was getting done. And one of the big things that made that possible was technology. We're going to do an episode, the next episode actually, on technology and how it influenced remote work, and will continue to over the next few years. But there was, at the same time that we had this crisis, the technology wave was hitting to a point where tools like Zoom, for example, which had been a free product, had zero corporate penetration really, suddenly was available to everybody. And people who had never used webcams, people who had never been on web meetings or had to learn using these tools, it was suddenly there. I can't imagine surviving the pandemic without those tools, imperfect as they are. Microsoft launched Teams, which has now become part of the air we breathe, like it or not. I mean, the dirty little secret of that is that Teams launched about a year and a half before it was ready, but the need existed, and so the tool was there. And so we ran through COVID, and then it was, okay, can we get back to the office? Do we not get back to the office? 2023, oh, this is great. We've learned to work from home. We can do this. Maybe we need to go back to the office now. Well, not so fast. When the immediate panic of the pandemic died down, a lot of organizations just wanted to go back to the before times. They wanted to go back to what had happened before. Well, that wasn't going to happen. And it wasn't going to happen for a couple of reasons. One is that the genie was out of the bottle. Once people realized that I don't have to fight traffic and go to the office and deal with Bob's tuna sandwich breath, a lot of people decided they didn't want to. Turns out that 2 years or so of being away from the hubbub of the office gives people time to think, and not everybody wanted to go back to the office. Some people were requesting the ability to remain at work. We got the Great Resignation, which was, I'm not going back to the office and you can't make me. And then we had the Great Return, which was companies saying, we don't care, we want you back here. And so return to office mandates happened, and they were basically chaotic. I talked to a lot of people about how their return to office worked. A lot of the plans were put in place without taking into account things like people had essentially gotten a raise during COVID because they weren't spending $3,000 a year on commuting. Many companies said, okay, come back to the office, but we saw the return of stealth remote, which is, yeah, you've proven you can work remotely, so I'm not going to make you come in every day. It kept some employees happy, but it created all the systemic problems which were there before COVID of unfairness and how do you manage performance, and do you treat people in the office the same way that you treat those who are out of it? And those systemic problems like succession planning and fair pay, employee evaluations kind of bring us to where we are now. So as of 2025, 77% of large corporations use some degree of flexible or hybrid work, although it's inconsistent and largely unregulated and untracked. 25% of the general workforce works mostly remote, and 32% of the general office workers are in the office full time. There isn't a consistent, successful, replicable model out there. And in the next episode, we're going to talk about the three models: remote first, hybrid, and in office. But all of this brings us back to our starting point. If remote work as we know it is barely 30 years old, are we surprised that most of us are still figuring it out? Years of ingrained program behavior has changed what it means to be in the office, what it means to dress formally for work. All of those things are still questions that we're answering. The point here is that we have more questions than answers. And while there is a reduction in remote first work, remote work is not going away. And if you have a couple of members of your team who are working remotely on any given day, you actually have a remote team, or at the very least, a hybrid team. Leaders and organizations are going to have to be intentional about their goals, their expectations, while we continue to learn and experiment and try new things. So in the rest of this series, we're going to take a look at some very important points. We're going to look at new models for working in organizations. We're going to take a look at technology and where we think it's going over the next 5 years. We're going to take a look then in depth at remote and hybrid work and what that means going forward for organizations on a very macro level, for leaders. As leaders, what does this mean for us going forward? And as individuals, what does the evolving workplace mean for them if they want a career, a successful lifestyle, to be employed? All of these things are going to merit some more investigation over the next few weeks in this series. So thank you for joining me. I know this has been a little long, but it's created context. We know how we got here, and it was unwieldy and weird and largely unplanned, but here we are. Next episode, we're going to take a look at the so what. What do we do now? My name is Wayne Turmel. Thank you for joining us. All of these podcast episodes also have blog versions, which are available at kevineikenberry.com. You can contact me, Wayne, at kevineikenberry.com. I appreciate you listening. I look forward to walking you through the next few episodes. And thank you for joining us on The Evolving Workplace.